a professional jazz guitarist and teacher, and one of the biggest mistakes I see people make when soloing is using scales. But why? Aren't scales the foundation of melodies and music? Doesn't everyone recommend practicing and learning your scales? Well, when we dig in, you'll see why that's actually often wrong, as I've seen from teaching hundreds of students for more than 15 years. To put it simply, you've been lied to about how to improvise. So I'm gonna break this down once and for all in 3 simple parts. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear idea of exactly how to think about improvising, why scales don't work, and what to do instead. Starting with the first one, changing direction. So let's take a C minor 7 chord. We're playing over C minor 7. You might think, let me use a C minor scale, a C Dorian. I've learned my modes and scales. Wrong. Let's understand why this doesn't work. When I play a C Dorian scale, let's say, and I use that in my improvisation, there is no change in direction. It's very obvious to the listener where that's going, and every step to the next note is just an interval of a second. It's very obvious, it's very boring. So what can we do instead? We can change direction in the middle of this line. And I'll give you an example that is from Joe Pass. A very simple example. We're gonna go up the scale, and then when we hit the 5th, we're gonna come back down. That's the change of direction. We're ascending, and then we descend. It sounds like this. Let's look at change of direction now on the descending side. What if we have a C7 chord and we are on a B flat and we want to descend there? You might think, oh, I'll use C mixolydian. Mixolydian goes with dominant, right? No, that doesn't sound that good. What can we do instead? Let's use the same change of direction. And let's take an example from the master of bebop and playing lines like this, Charlie Parker. So what do we do here? We're descending, but when we hit that 3rd of C7, that E, we're gonna change direction, this time ascending now with an arpeggio. So we go up E, G, B flat, D. Okay, so that's an E minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. And then ending with another change in direction. We were ascending, we descend. You see how it's so much more interesting to hear this kind of idea when we have these peaks and valleys in the melody? The second thing I want you guys to start doing instead of playing scales is adding in chromaticism. So we can change direction. We talked about that. Here's another technique, adding in chromaticism. And let's look at an example that's also descending, and we'll do this over E7. E7 altered, E7 sharp 9. So say we're on that E7 sharp 9, and you're on that sharp 9, that G. You might be thinking, oh, I'll play something that's like E mixolydian, maybe with the sharp 9, flat 9. And then I'll end on this G sharp, right? There's a couple issues with that. So if we're starting on the downbeat with that G, we have that G sharp on that upbeat. Maybe we don't want it there. Maybe we really want to emphasize that 3rd on the downbeat. One thing we can do to help us line up our notes however we want them, whatever we decide, and you might not always want the 3rd on the downbeat, I'm not saying that, but sometimes we want control over where we're placing these notes. Something that you can do, and that a lot of players do, is adding in chromaticism between the notes so that it's less of a scale and it's less predictable. Remember, the whole problem with these scales and using them in your improvisation is that they're very predictable to the listener's ear, and that translates to sounding bad. So this is an example from Dexter Gordon on Benji's Bounce, and it sounds like this. This is what he's doing here instead of just playing a scale going down E7. So he starts off right at the beginning having 4 notes in a row descending chromatically by a half step. And it has 2 functions. It gives us some of that chromaticism, and that gives us a nice tension that we might want. And then it also lets us land on the 3rd G sharp on that downbeat. Maybe you want that. Maybe he wanted that in this solo. Another thing we can do in addition to chromaticism, and this is a third technique here, is a pivot. And with this pivot, what we'll do is change the octave of the note we're playing. And by doing that, it creates a more interesting, in a sense it's a change of direction, but it's just a single note that we move, which creates this pivot. We're making a jump now, we're pivoting. This is an example from Louis Armstrong. I'll play it for you first, and then we'll discuss what's going on. Okay, so in this example, if you were on an F chord, you might have just ascended up F major scale, or at least thought of those notes. Instead of starting on that F, we could move it up an octave so that when we go down, we create this pivot. Usually a pivot is an interval of a sixth. So we have that, and then we're adding in chromaticism. So Louis Armstrong is combining this pivot, that jump, which is a sort of change of direction, with the chromaticism we talked about, while he's ascending up sort of a major scale. Right? So instead of just going up the major scale, and the other issue it solves is if we just went up the major scale, we would have that last note on an upbeat instead of on a strong beat with the downbeat. And this fixes that, just like with the Dexter Gordon lick, we fixed it by adding in chromaticism. A lot of times when you hear some of these jazz masters adding chromaticism, it's helping them properly use tension and release. Whatever that means to them personally with how their feel is, sometimes we want to be able to place tension in certain areas and have it resolve on certain beats. It gives different feelings. And so in this one, we get that feeling of resolution on a strong downbeat. Right there. So those are the three techniques that you should be looking at, right? Change of direction, chromaticism, and pivots. But why don't we dig in even deeper and show you some actual practical examples of if you're on a certain note over a chord and you are thinking about going up a scale, what can you actually do instead? It's fine for me, and a lot of YouTubers do this, is they'll teach you these concepts, but then they don't show you the actual practical examples. So if you're in the solo and you're improvising, I want you guys to know exactly what you can do and have real examples to practice. So I'm going to show you that right now. Let's take the first one. Say you're on the root of a chord. Instead of going up the scale, here's an example of what you can do. So this is for a root ascending. Let's say you're on a 2-5 G minor and C7. You might be thinking, oh, I'll ascend up G Dorian over this. Starting on, say I'm on this G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, and you just keep going. Let's listen to what Wes does instead of ascending a scale there from the root. So we start in the same place. So one possible solution here is we ascend up an arpeggio after we go up the scale, right? We do a few notes of the scale, G, A, B flat. When we get to that B flat, we're doing a B flat major 7 arpeggio into a G minor arpeggio. So that's one possible solution here. Okay, but then you say, Chase, I'm not on the root, I'm on the third, and it's a C7. And so I really want to just go up C mixolydian starting on the third, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. Won't that sound good? Let's do what Clifford Brown does here instead. So if you find yourself on that third, instead of going up the scale, and you want to ascend, go up an arpeggio, skip down, and do this chromaticism. And that will work. Okay, but what if you're on the fifth instead, and you want to ascend? You really want to play that major scale. Do not do it. Let's say you have a D7 going to G minor, and you're all the way up here on the fifth, A, and you're wanting to go up that D mixolydian, starting on A, but it's starting to get out of range. That might be one problem you have ascending on these scales. You're hearing a melody that goes up, but if you play this scale, you quickly get out of range of your instrument. So let's see how George Benson solves this. Starting on the fifth, we'll do some ascending, but we're not going to go all the way up there with the scale. So very similar to that Clifford Brown one we looked at, we have this chromaticism from the fifth. So that's really cool to know. From the fifth, on a dominant chord, you can go up chromatically like that from the fifth to the flat 7. Hits that flat 9, back down, and then ending on that 11th. It's kind of a nice melody in G minor, right? What if you're on the major 7th and you want to ascend? It's, you just want to go up the scale. You're on E flat major and you just want to go up that scale. You don't know what else you can do there from the major 7th. Let's look at an example from Clifford Brown once again. So we hear that chromatic ascent once again. We're going to go up the major 7th arpeggio. Maybe you know that. Maybe, oh, okay, I'm ascending. I'll use the ascending major 7 arpeggio. Cool. But what can you do after that? You can actually ascend chromatically from that major 7th up to the 9th. Sounds really, really nice. Whether you stay in position or shift up to go up there, either way will work great. So that's ascending from any of these chord tones, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. But a lot of times we're not ascending, we're descending. So let's do this again, descending. And this will let you know, no matter what situation you're in, ascending or descending on any of the chord tones, you will have a very specific thing you can do and practice. What I would do is practice just one of these ideas over whatever song you're practicing or whatever chord change is giving you trouble. This idea is coming from my Essential Jazz Vocab course, which is accessible for any student of Chase's Guitar Academy, any member. We're also just now starting our CGA Live program. So if you want to learn from me live, we have 3 classes every week. A class from me every Monday, a live jam session where you can actually play with me live and jam with other peers on Tuesdays. And then on Wednesdays or Thursdays, I bring in a jazz master, one of the best jazz educators out there, Barry Green, Rodney Jones, Chico Pinheiro, or Dan Wilson, every single week. For the whole semester, you guys can learn direct from them. So if that's interesting to you, check the link, 14-day free trial. Anyways, check it out. So let's look at descending now. So that's a cool piece of vocab from Dexter Gordon, doing a chromatic descent, almost the same idea we had before with all of these chromatic ascents. From the root, in this case B flat minor, we can just descend chromatically. A lot of times what I'm noticing here, what you might be noticing, is rhythmically they play these as triplets. So that chromatic descent has a triplet feel. And then this nice jump of a 9th back up to that C, almost anticipating an A flat major resolution. How about the 3rd? What if we're on a 2-5, we're on the 3rd A flat of F minor, and we're just descending that scale. We want to do that. Let's do something a little bit more interesting. I want to see also if you can recognize from the beginning which techniques are being used. So for this one, ask yourself, which of the techniques, change of direction, pivot, chromaticism, are we using in this lick from Clifford Brown? So here's the answer. We start off with a pivot, that jump down of a 6th, and then we have some chromaticism. So it's really using all 3, pivot with the change of direction and chromaticism. And you can see how that's so much more interesting as a melody than just if going down the scale. So boring. But once you start to learn these elements, how you can start connecting them, and the way to do that is by learning this actual vocab. Then you can start to really improvise and hear these ideas instead of just intellectually thinking, I know the scale that goes over this chord. That's not how you improvise. It's using a totally different part of the brain, different thought process. It's not thinking in that sense of matching chord to scale. If you're there right now, I just want to let you know that is not going to get you further in your improvising progress. So try something new. Try this out. Okay, what if we're on the 5th now and we have a 2-5 E minor A7? Maybe we just go down the scale. Doesn't that work nice, right? We're on E minor. And we land on the root for that. It could work. I'm not saying scales never work or they're never ever played. But it's not necessarily the most interesting choice. Again, when we're improvising, maybe a scale comes out, maybe it makes sense in that context. But if you're thinking and playing in scales, I can guarantee you're not playing interesting melodic solos. So why don't we see how Pat Martino would approach this? If he's on the 5th of that 2-5, what's something he might do here? Well, let's take a listen to this example. ask yourself, why is that so much better than just playing the scale? We start on that same place. We're almost playing a scale. We're doing 5, 3, 2, 1 instead of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But we add in that chromaticism and the changing of these intervals. We're not always just going down the scale. The brain picks up on that very quickly. So we have this 5, 3, 2, 1. And we get that chromaticism, almost implying like A7 sharp 11, but really just chromatically going down. So you hear that chromatic line of, he throws that B in between, so we have a little bit of change of direction as well. And that just fits nicer. Believe me, when you play that on guitar, it just feels so much more swinging. It's more comfortable in the hands. It just works. Final example here, say we're on a D7 on the 7th and we're descending. One issue you might run into is the fact that you don't have any more range going lower. So actually on the ascending side, when we looked at D7, we might start to get out of range ascending. Well, the same thing can happen to us descending. What if we're on D7 and we're on this low C and we want to go down as a sort of idea? We hear something going lower at first. We might run out. We don't have a low D to play, right? So here's what we can do instead, and this lick comes from Charlie Parker, the master of these improvised lines. Once again, we're descending that scale, cool, but eventually we do a pivot, change of direction, chromaticism, and that together is a very simple formula, not the only formula, but a very simple formula to help you break out of these scales. Playing with scales is sort of like trying to use the alphabet by itself to come up with words to communicate with someone. You don't just think, okay, I have my 26 letters of the alphabet and here's how I'm gonna put these letters together in this order, always in the same order. It doesn't come up with anything meaningful, anything that the other person will connect to or understand. The way we do it is we learn words. In the same way right now, you're hopefully learning vocabulary, musical vocabulary, from some of these masters that will connect with the listener. So if you want to learn more of this, you can check out any of my other YouTube videos. I'll put some in the playlist right here, or come join Chase's Guitar Academy. I'd be happy to work with you and help you out personally, one-on-one. Hit that like button, subscribe, comment, let me know what you guys thought of this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm also hoping to do some more live streams, so if you have any ideas for what you might want to see in a live stream and you stuck around this long, then let me know.